Thank you for joining us for Still Speaking, a podcast from Ivanhoe Congregational Church. No matter who you are or where you are in life's journey, you are welcome here. We are a united Church of Christ in Mundelein, Illinois, and an open and affirming congregation. This podcast aims to explore Scripture through conversation with the purpose of discovering new insights and enhancing individual faith practices. God is still speaking, and we are all listening to discern a message for today and deepen our faith.
Hello, welcome to episode 44 of the Still Speaking podcast. This week, we're talking about compassionate community and how we can help each other to be more resilient, especially as we're going into the holiday season, the winter, and increasingly across the country, more lockdown. I'm Shelley Groh. I'm here with our pastor, Chris Hewitt. And this week we have a special guest, Alli Salituro. So those of you who are members of Ivanhoe Church know Alli. If you are listening in and you're not one of our regular members, welcome. And, just as background, Alli is a clinical psychologist. She works in private practice. And, we're just so grateful that you were able to make the time to be here with us today. I know, like me, you're also a working mom and homeschooling, and we all have a lot going on these days. So I really appreciate you making the time for this conversation. We really wanted to draw on your expertise for helping people cope with, anxiety and some of the stressors that we've been living with for the past 8 months. A lot of what we've been talking about over the past few weeks is how to build that resiliency, but also how to stay grounded in our faith so that we can have, hope for a better future. A few episodes ago, we talked about, it's okay to not be okay. And I think that's where we want to start today. So I'll begin with a question and we can go from there. But can you just talk a little bit maybe about some trends that you've seen this year in the conversations you're having, obviously without getting into any private information?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think the trends that I'm seeing are things that you probably would see, in yourselves as well. A lot of people are struggling with what's been going on. It's a different type of thing that we're all dealing with. When somebody's dealing with an individual event, like let's just say they have, a dysfunctional family or whatever, there's things that people can do to cope with that aren't available to us, like in our current situation. So, taking a vacation or, leaving the situation somehow, stuff like that. So what we're going through right now is very different than a lot of the other things that we're coping with. And so because of that, I think people are struggling in unique ways. When this first started happening, one of the most common things I heard was, I think people are somewhat familiar with the stages of grief, but denial. That at the very beginning, people were saying things like, I just can't believe this is happening. They were talking about like, when this is all over, like as if it was going to be a couple weeks, we're going to, do such and such. When I first closed my practice and started just doing video therapy, people were trying to make appointments for like 3 weeks in person or whatever. And it was sort of interesting to see that there were a lot of people who just had no real concept of what was going on. And I don't think that was an intelligence thing. I think that denial is a way that our psyche or whatever protects us from things that are just too big to digest all at once. So denial, I think, is something that started early on. There are some people who probably still do it to some extent, where they sort of do a lot of distracting or whatever in a way that's unhealthy, where they're trying to not focus on what's going on. I can talk about some of what I see in person, but I also know that there's some national trends where there's a higher rate of addiction, higher rate of suicide. I know from talking to friends, I know from just talking to clients as well, a lot of people are gaining weight because we're more sedentary. People are just sort of eating more out of comfort and things like that. So yeah, I think that a lot of people feel uncertain. They don't know what the future holds. And so it makes it really hard to know how long are we coping with this? How do we cope with it? And so forth. So I think that's a lot of what I'm seeing just in everybody.
I think that uncertain future is a lot of what weighs. I mean, you started by saying people thought this would be 2 weeks. A lot of us did. I mean, when we went home on March 13th, we were like, okay, we'll all work from home for a little bit and then we'll be back in the office. And I know my company has moved back our return to work date many times. There was a while where it was going to be the end of summer, and then it was October, and then maybe it would be the first of the year. We're looking, my company, at least another 8 months at home. They just went ahead and said, order office equipment. Like,
yeah,
get comfortable because we're like maybe halfway through this.
Well, isn't it interesting too that your company just now 8 months into it is saying order equipment, so that like once again, as far as denial or whatever, we're so used to functioning in our other way that we can't think about a long-term problem that we're going to cope with. Like I always used to say in graduate school, I can cope with anything for a semester. If there's like some sort of class that I don't enjoy or whatever, once December comes, you're done with this teacher, you're done with this workload, whatever. But this is one of these things where not only is it a long-term problem that we're coping with, but it's also an undetermined length of time. So we don't even know how long we have to wait until we're back to quote unquote normal, which I think, that's another thing. It's not, things are never going to be exactly the same as they were before.
And there's no roadmap.
Right.
It's not like, you're recovering from knee surgery and this is what you can expect because other people have gone through it before you.
Exactly.
We're all trying to figure this out. Doctors and nurses are trying to figure out treatments and share information in real time. And families are trying to figure out safe ways to celebrate holidays. And we're all navigating this together for the first time and coming at it in really different ways. And I think that adds some of the stress as well.
Yeah, definitely.
I think that's really why I wanted to reach out to you, because we had talked a couple times before about the mental health aspect of this, and I appreciate everything you've said to this point. So over the past couple of weeks, I think the reality of missing holidays or having to observe these holidays in different ways has really set in, and I've heard people, and I think it's healthy to name it, express their sadness, and in terms of grief, this might be some getting into depression, but I really wanted to reach out to ask you to help us look at our toolkit in terms of handling these holidays, because they're entirely different and something we've never experienced before.
Yeah.
From my aspect, I think I've been looking at the ritual of worship and services as kind of a touchstone. While it's different, there's a bit of normalcy or familiarity that makes people feel comfortable and therefore opens themselves to the hope and strength we can have from our faith. But knowing that it's not going to end soon, knowing that we have to not only do Thanksgiving, but now Christmas and probably many more things in a way we've never experienced before, I think it brings great sadness to people.
Yeah, no, I agree. And as I was thinking about talking about a toolkit or whatever today, I think that was one of the things that I had thought about emphasizing is that first and foremost, we're not trying to make our feelings go away. I think it's okay to be sad about this. It's okay. And in fact, doing what I do for a living, I've come to realize that feelings are tools that help us understand more about what's going on with ourselves. And I think pain is very transformative. I think pain helps us become a different person than who we were before we went through it. So if we, and in some ways, I know this is going to, if somebody's like really depressed, they're going to listen to this and think like, oh, shut up or whatever. But pain is a gift from God. Pain is something that God gives us to make us different. And so we may not want to go through it, but there's definitely, it's definitely worth looking at, definitely worth accepting and trying to kind of acknowledge so that you can get the sort of gifts from it.
So the expression, the feeling of pain means that something has changed and therefore I need to adapt and grow. Is that what you're saying?
I think so. I think of sadness as being an emotion that happens when something is missing, something's removed from your life. And anger is similar to that because that's when you feel like you've been robbed of something or somebody's taken something away from you that you deserve or that you whatever. So those two things kind of go hand in hand. So I could see how, you know, I've seen this before, and I think we talked about this earlier this week, where you know, somebody talks about being sad about what's going on, or they're going to miss the holidays, or people will say like, make a gratitude list, look on the bright side, or whatever. And I think that's doing a real disservice. I think in order to kind of get to that point, a lot of times you need to sort of acknowledge what's missing. Like, why am I feeling this way? And then once you can recognize the importance of that, then I think it's a lot easier to move on versus just trying to slap a gratitude list on the top of that. So that's when I was talking at the beginning, saying about the toolkit, I don't want to indicate that a toolkit is a way of making the pain go away, or making the pain seem like it's not important somehow.
Thank you. Thank you for expressing that, because, you know, we've spoken to this before in past episodes, and particularly within Psalms of Lament, that we can't jump quickly to the hope and the joy, that we need to go through this valley of time. My mind went to thinking about our holiday tables and sitting down for meals, and just acknowledging, or perhaps even naming those empty chairs. That's part of our Jewish friends have a ritual of having that empty chair, and that might be, while it's sad, it would be important to name that, and to name this difficulty, and then find a way to cope. Perhaps then you Zoom in, or you FaceTime those family members, but you acknowledge that we can't be sitting in the same room this year.
Yeah. Well, and if you don't mourn their loss, if it's somebody who's passed away, like in the Jewish tradition, then, you know, were they important to you if you don't feel the loss? So in the similar way, like what we're going through right now, you know, we don't get to have a normal Thanksgiving. We don't get to have a normal Christmas, but maybe on the other side of this, we recognize what we really had.
Thank you. So what are some tools that, as you said, won't make it go away, but can help us cope and be resilient?
Well, so I was thinking of also highlighting that there's not like a one size fits all for everybody. Everybody goes through things differently. And if you think about your situation versus other people's situation, that makes sense. You know, some people are, you know, in an assisted living facility maybe, and they've got sort of a different experience of this versus, I'm sure Shelley and I could talk for hours about just like, right now, I don't even get a moment to myself, and I'm just doing laundry and cooking nonstop when I'm not working. So there's different ways of coping with what's going on, depending on what your situation is. And then even prior to all this, I'm sure everybody had sort of different ways that they were raised, or things that they feel able to do. That being said, there are a few things that I think probably would help just about anybody. One is just remembering to breathe, as simple as that sounds. Just getting you know, to having a ritual maybe of like every time you sit down to the dinner table or something like that, take a nice deep breath, and just trying to remember to use that as a way of relaxing. Things like exercising, having a good sleep schedule, those are going to be things that are going to help people no matter what. Eating well, if you think about the chemicals in your brain, your body needs certain building blocks to actually create those. And so if you're just eating leftover Halloween candy all the time and not getting in, you know, the nutrients that you need. Yeah, I'm sure that Reese's is a precursor to dopamine somehow, but I don't know that that's necessarily what your body needs. So some of those things. And then just to remember that anytime you're using one of the coping skills, to do everything in moderation. So sleep is definitely good for you, but sleeping all the time is not good for you. So I wrote down just some basic themes through the handouts that I had given you. And like I said, I don't want to just like run through a huge list of it. But essentially, I think that coping with what's going on is a balance of distraction and also facing it at the same time. So you don't want to necessarily sit and think about it all the time, because there's really not a lot you can do about it. But at the same time, if you're distracting all the time, then you're not facing it. And so it's not really helping you transform yourself through it. So things that people do to distract themselves, you know, I'm sure I don't need to go through too much of that, but, you know, like watching TV, doing any kind of visualization, just deciding like, I'm going to think about this tomorrow as a distraction. And then in terms of facing it, we talked earlier about just, you know, therapy as being a good way to face things and to sort of work your way through things. But there are people who aren't necessarily comfortable with teletherapy, or just not comfortable with therapy in general. So things like journaling, talking to other people in your life, focusing on the things that you can control about what's going on. Even, I don't know if we want to take some time out and talk about prayer as being a way of dealing with it, but I think prayer is really therapeutic. I think it helps us think about the bigger picture and yielding control to God, and even just thinking about God being a comforting being that's sort of there wanting the best for us, even if it doesn't feel like it's the best for us in the moment. So those are I was going to say, those are the two main things that I think when you think about coping, you kind of think about, they fall into probably one or the other category.
And there's so much power, I think, in naming the emotion, in terms of facing it, to be able to say, I feel sad, or, and express that. And with little kids, we do that a lot. Can you describe how you're feeling right now? And, where do we go from there? But it makes it more tangible.
Yeah, I was going to say, let me just interject for a second too. I think when you name it versus just kind of like acknowledging it or feeling it or whatever, you can say like, oh, there have been other times in my life when I was sad before, and what did I do then? So that sort of helps you to figure out a way of processing it. Or when you talk to somebody else who says that they feel sad, then all of a sudden it kind of clicks for you that you feel like, oh, okay, we're feeling the same way. And then that's soothing as well, to have some sort of connection with somebody else where they're going through a similar experience.
Everybody is obviously on a different kind of place in terms of how they've been coping, and some people may have felt more anxiety than others. If you are talking with somebody, so like for our listeners, if they're maybe talking to a family member or a friend who's having a particularly difficult time and is really deeply feeling that sadness, what are some ways that people who are not trained psychologists to be able to effectively talk to them about it? We all know people who go in with a quick fix. Are there questions that you recommend asking, or how can we help each other?
Well, so I think part of why it's common for people to, I was talking about that gratitude list before, to say like, turn the frown upside down, and, just think of things you're grateful for, is because it's uncomfortable for us to see somebody that we care about in pain. And so even just to sort of reflect on that ourselves, that if we say the wrong thing, it's coming from a good place. We want the person to not feel that way because it's uncomfortable for us to be in that with them. That being said, I think the most powerful advice I can give is just to listen to the other person. And there's something that they talk about in therapy now about being curious. And so just as you're listening to somebody else, to just think about what it is that you would like to know about what they're going through or what they might need to talk about. And I think when you're curious with something, then you can't be judgmental at the same time. It's the opposite of that. And so when you try to adopt that stance, it's a lot easier for you to just be open to whatever it is the other person is saying. And most people just want somebody to witness what they're saying. They don't necessarily need answers, because we don't have any answers. I don't have any answers about the pandemic, and I'm doing this for a living. So if I can do it, anybody can do it.
I really appreciate you saying it that way, because I think in this time of pandemic, we can't be with people in the way we used to be with people, and there's a certain depth. Maybe it's a energy thing, but just sitting with someone, the theme this week is about compassion, which literally means to suffer with someone. So to experience their pain, usually I can't do anything to fix it, to take it away, but I can be with someone, literally sitting next to them, holding their hand, maybe giving them a hug if that's appropriate. But in my training, that was called a ministry of presence. So when I can't be in the same physical place with someone to offer them comfort and care on the phone via this Zoom, whatever the technology is, I need to put that in words, because just sitting here on an empty screen. So asking those good questions. And I love the way that you said that being curious means I can't be judgmental. So I'm actually listening versus thinking about the thing I want to say to fix it.
Yes, I liked what you were saying too about being with somebody, and that we can't do it necessarily in the same way. So even if you can't hug somebody, to say, oh, I wish I could give you a hug right now, that's more than what we're doing just by sitting and being silent as well.
That's wonderful. I listened to a podcast this week. Everybody knows I love Brene Brown. And she has a podcast called Unlocking Us. And in her most recent episode, she interviewed Dolly Parton. And I bring this up because while you all are listening through your podcast app, if you wanted to go further into, these topics, that would be another great one to listen to. And they talk together about how do you look in the face of pain. So like instead of ignoring the pain that somebody else is going through, but being able to address it. And in my line of work, I, don't do as much counseling necessarily, but, we are leading people. And so there are a lot of, similar tactics that we train our leaders with. And I've always really come back to the phrase, tell me more. So even if I can't come up with a question, it just encourages people that they have this comfortable, open space to go, a layer deeper.
Yeah. No, I like what you said too about Brene Brown's principle of like going into the pain or whatever. I think that's what I was talking about before about like it's so I don't know if it's human or if it's just part of our current society. It's so counterintuitive to do that. People want to get away from the pain. That's, getting back to that gratitude list, or there's just so many ways to distract ourselves and not pay attention to it. And maybe that's why therapy feels different to people than just a regular conversation, because you can just like talk about that stuff and you don't have to worry about protecting the other person from your pain or whatever. So yeah, the idea that if you make it okay for somebody else to talk about it, that it, that's going to, help them feel better, because then they have a forum or whatever to just like be in that.
That's wonderful. I'd love to go around and hear from both of you. Like, what is your go-to self-care? Like when you're having a bad day or wish you could just go back to bed, like what is your go-to?
I'll let Chris go first.
I think you already named the Halloween candy. So honestly, when I've had a hard event, not recently with hospital visits, because we can't visit people in the hospital, but when I've had those crisis situations, I have coped with ice cream or chocolate, or I just needed something to self-soothe. But probably the stressors of the day, trying to escape those and not revisit the to-do list or the conversation that didn't go the best. I use television comedy, something that escapes my mind from looping over the work of the day.
Comedy is a great one. I've been watching a lot of dry bar comedy on YouTube. Good, clean fun. Stand-up comedians.
Yeah. I'm sure I'm different than a lot of people just because of what I do for a living. I feel like if I'm not facing things, then when I sit in a session with somebody, it starts to come out, and then I'm not equipped to handle it. So I feel like I have to kind of be more on my game as far as like just keeping an eye on what's going on with me. So at the beginning of the pandemic, I found myself wanting to control a lot. And so I was, I joke around in that pastoral relations committee meeting about having a spreadsheet or whatever, but it's just so soothing. I used to do that with the kids' naps too, where I'd try and figure out like, are we giving up a nap? What time do they normally nap? What would be a good time to shift things to? So I just like having structure and routine and whatever. And I know that a lot of people like that as well. And then at some point, I found myself like, as strange as it is, acceptance is kind of a tool as well. Just sort of, I found like I started having dreams where people were wearing masks and so forth, where I just started to realize like, okay, so I need to start to accept that this is our reality instead of, trying to control it or trying to make it go away or whatever. And then, then I think finally now I'm in this stage where I'm sort of like, since there's not a lot I can do, I'm just trying to focus on the here and now, just sort of like like I was talking to you about, the laundry and the cooking and trying to take care of the kids, and just focusing on like, we're inside our house, we're safe inside our house. This is like our little cocoon, and just trying to kind of focus on that. And so to just kind of like come up with a toolkit thing. I think a lot of that is just through journaling. Sometimes if I drive to pick up my mail every week, just kind of thinking through things with quiet. I like having the quiet.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. Anything else that either of you want to add before we?
Well, you usually ask for a takeaway, so I'd like Alli to give us a takeaway. We've discussed a couple over recent episodes, but one of the things you had put in the packet that I think might be not a one size fits all, but could be applicable to anybody. You'd given something about a tool in situations like the crisis we're living through might be to acknowledge our senses. Could you say more about that?
Yeah, so that's grounding techniques. And so grounding techniques are a way of getting us to focus on the present and ourselves instead of like the past or the future or something outside of ourselves. So those tools are particularly helpful with something like a pandemic because, this is not a situation that we can exert any control over. So the grounding techniques I think that you were talking about earlier were focusing on the five senses. So pick out 5 things you can see, 4 things you can hear, 3 things you can smell, 2 things you can, I don't even know if taste applies or whatever. You can always pop in a piece of gum if you feel like you're not doing the activity right. But just sort of like focusing on the here and now, focusing on yourself. And it's a way of literally you can kind of calm down your nervous system by doing that.
You have another one you want to recommend?
Well, I started out at the beginning talking about things that would help anybody, and I talked about like exercise and breathing and stuff like that. I gave you a handout in there that's been really helpful for me as a therapist with the parasympathetic, sympathetic nervous system, which I won't get into any of that. But basically, there's been some research that talks about things that just sort of help us calm down, like it's not us even doing a toolkit. It's more just sort of like, these are things that will calm you down. And so it's like acknowledging that you're in a safe place or feeling safety, connecting with other people, touch, laughter. You talked about that, Shelley, as well, laughter is incompatible with situations that aren't safe. So just doing a lot of things that are going to sort of like tell our nervous system that we're okay and help sort of bring us out of that space where we're, not able to sleep at night and whatever. So humming, singing, listening to music. I'm looking at my list here. And just having routine was another thing that they listed on there as well, that when your body knows what to expect, it doesn't put itself in fight or flight.
That's really important. And I think that was one of the things that, changed the most when those who were, working out of the home and then had to start working from home, or changes in school and things like that. It was like, I can speak from personal experience. I had a routine before March where I would wake up, walk on the treadmill, get coffee, and you did all these things. Well, all of a sudden, because we weren't commuting, I wasn't getting up at the same time. I wasn't doing the walk at the same time of day. And that's one of the things that I'm actively trying to work on. I also love that list of comforts, and that was something that I did very early in the pandemic where nothing felt comfortable.
Yeah.
Everything felt very uncomfortable to me. And so I just made a list of 10 things that I enjoy. And they were simple. It was like hug the girls or, watch comedy on YouTube, things that even if I was in a state of anxiety where I couldn't remember what will calm me down, I had this piece of paper on my desk that I could look at and be like, okay, I can do one of these things right now. I can go walk outside and stand, with my face towards the sun for a minute or whatever it is.
And it's in your handwriting, so it's not like somebody else telling you should be doing better than this. It's sort of like, I know that this is what makes me feel better.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time. This has been incredible. We'd love to have you back, especially since we know that the pandemic is not going away anytime soon.
And neither am I. I'm going to be sitting down here twice a week for hours and hours.
Wonderful. Pastor Chris, would you like to close us in prayer?
Yeah, let me just summarize. So again, we were looking at this from an aspect of this series of putting down deep roots, the core of resilient faith communities. And we began with being Christ-centered. We looked at connections with one another. We talked about ways to act on the commitments that we have, and this week about being compassionate. And so, as I said, we can't be compassionate with others unless we're taking care of ourselves. So we really appreciate Dr. Salituro helping us with this. So let us return
Thanks
to that.
so much for inviting me.
Yeah, let's return to that focus of being Christ-centered and have a moment of prayer. God, we give thanks for your love, the love that we know through Jesus Christ that roots us in a faith that gives us hope in these times of pain. We ask that you will allow us to hold fast to the hope that it will get better, that there is light at the end of this darkness. And as we look forward to the light of Christ coming again, we know that nothing will overcome it. So let that light and love fill us, that it might overflow, that then we can share it with others. Bless us, that we might be a blessing to others in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you for joining us for this podcast from Ivanhoe Congregational Church. We hope you'll join us for worship on any Sunday morning at 10 a.m. You can find us on Facebook or visit our website at ivanhoechurch.org. That's IVAHOE church.org. We are an inclusive church in Mundelein, Illinois, living our faith with hope for tomorrow and celebrating our history dating back to 1838. We are strongly committed to social responsible stewardship of God's creation. We extend God's extravagant welcome as revealed in Jesus Christ and empowered by the Holy Spirit. We welcome all people to join our vibrant, diverse, and supportive faith community. To you, with grace and peace.